My name is Beth Ferguson, and I am one of the implementation coaches with the Oregon Response to Instruction and Intervention Project, also known as ORTII. ORTII is funded by the Oregon Department of Education to provide technical assistance to school districts as they build, implement, and sustain multi-tiered systems of support, primarily in the area of elementary literacy. Our vision is that every child in every Oregon school district will receive equitable access to evidence-based core, strategic, and individualized literacy instruction in order to become a proficient reader. And we do this through our mission. And I'm just going to call out this part of our mission tonight, the development of school district capacity for both MTSS and evidence-based literacy instruction. And that part of our mission is directly related to what we are doing tonight. We are here to support our district and school leaders and your capacity to lead MTSS for literacy. Go ahead. And because we know that leaders are so essential to this work, we have several opportunities coming up this spring for you, whether you're Oregonian or not. But on April 15th, as part of our big main conference that we're having in Eugene, the pre-conference day on April 15th is going to be a leadership workshop. So primarily for district and building leaders and coaches, principals and coaches, with the author of MTSS for Reading Improvement, Sarah Brown. And then, of course, the main conference will have some leadership strands built in throughout and also build your capacity to just understand effective reading instruction. The other thing we have heard from some of our particularly smaller school districts is that they are interested in having some job-alike communities of practice. So how can you communicate with people who have similar jobs to you in a place where there may be no one else who has a job like you? So if that is something of interest to you and you would like us to help facilitate some sort of community practice, there's a QR code right here on this slide, or Sharon is going to go ahead and put a survey in the chat to let us know if you're interested in that. Again, it's nothing mandatory. We just have heard from people that that would be interesting. And if you are not currently an Oregon RTII partner district and you are interested in getting support from us next year and beyond in your work in Oregon, we will be going live with our applications on February 17th. Just know that support from Oregon RTII is free. It does not cost you anything to have us come in and consult with you there, and you actually get a little bit of money to support you in this work of building MTSS for literacy. So our coaching team has heard this story of Nystrom Elementary several times in a variety of conferences we've been to. And hearing Jamie and Margaret's story is truly, truly inspiring. And we wanted to be sure that we could share this with all of you throughout the state and beyond, even if you're even beyond the conference. So at this point, I just want to turn the time over to Jamie and Margaret and have you guys introduce yourselves and take the time that you need. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you. My name's Jamie Allardice. I'm the principal here at Nystrom Elementary. We're located in the Bay Area in California, and this is my 11th year as principal here.
My name's Margaret Goldberg. I'm the literacy coach, and I've been at Nystrom for 4.5 years now.
So a little bit about our school. We are a Title I school. We serve TK, which is California's transitional kindergarten through sixth grade. You can see our demographic breakdown there. And we have a lot of English learners, as you see, and also a really high mobility rate. So depending on the year, 20 to 26% of our students are with us for less than a year.
All right. So we are going to talk about how principals hear conflicting messages about what their jobs are. And we're going to get started by asking you to use the chat. Will you please type into the chat, what things does a principal do?
This is going to be fun.
Julia says, what don't we do? Great answer. True. Oh, I misread that and I thought it said havoc. HVAC. Got it. Hall duty, sub evaluations, lunch duty, IP meetings, other meetings, overseeing car duty. Jamie, what else is standing out to you that you're seeing in the chat?
Yes, all of these feel very, very familiar. Social media drama, way too much.
Tracking it down. Yep.
Yep, investigations. Um, yeah, staff appreciation. That's a
Okay.
lot of good stuff here.
Yes. Jamie, what tasks have you done this week that may not have appeared in the chat?
So this week we had a possum in our hallway, right as school was starting.
It was so cute.
That was a new one. Been here a long time, but never had a possum in the building, so we had to get the possum out. Definitely not in the job description.
Yeah. Anything else want to add as a highlight?
No, I mean all the other things like, whether it's being in the cafeteria, um, just came from an IEP meeting about 5 or 10 minutes ago, being out there in the morning greeting families and making sure there isn't chaos in the drop-off area. All of those are a huge part of my day. So I definitely feel all of that.
Yeah. And a lot of the things that were listed off are things that you might think of as like managerial tasks. So scheduling or supervision or discipline or parent meetings, those things that are managerial tasks, they often also come with deadlines. So like you need to get something done by a certain time. And so they can feel like the most urgent thing that's on the to-do list. And then when we look at the other side of the job, the instructional leadership side, that stuff feels a little bit hazier sometimes. So, Jamie, will you read this quote that you love about instructional leadership?
The term instructional leader has been in vogue for decades as the desired model for education leaders, principals especially. Yet the term is often more a slogan than a well-defined set of leadership practices.
What resonates in it for you?
I think all of us get into this work wanting to be an instructional leader. I know that's what got me out of the classroom, and in which I was very content being a teacher for a very long time, was like, no way, no way. That is such middle management. I don't want to do that. And it was when somebody convinced me I could be an instructional leader that I was like, started to think about it.
Mm,
Um, and it's not easy to get to that place.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, and I think this idea when you were talking about not wanting to be a principal, sometimes that's because we have an idea of what a principal means. And we'll think of principal as like this noun where it's like the chief, the top executive, the head of all others who's somehow going to control all of the levers of a school. We're imagining them almost like they're the captain of a ship and the ship is our school. But this is actually a relatively new way of thinking of what a principal is. So it used to mean something different, and it actually was an adjective. So will you open up the chat and type in if you know? It used to be the principal what? Ooh, questions. Yeah. What did? Ooh, uh-huh. Pause for a moment and see if anyone else had an idea. The principal what? Yeah. Okay. Well, I think the second we saw Beth's go into the chat, we were like, ooh, yep. It used to be the principal teacher. And so what this was just a head teacher of the school who was busy teaching and then took on a few administrative tasks in order to make the building run smoothly for a stipend. And then the administrative tasks kind of took over to the point where the person could no longer teach a classroom anymore. And then it has even taken over even more than that. We're going to get into the more than that in a little bit. So it used to be that we would think of this person as principal, teacher, focused on instruction, the instructor who assumed some tasks, but as schools got bigger and administrative tasks got bigger, it turned into a whole different job, the kind of job Jamie was talking about, maybe not really wanting to do. This is a statistic, 5 to 13%. And if you read the New York Times briefing, they always have like the number of the day. We're going to take this as the number of the day. 5 to 13% is the time the average school leader spends on matters related to instruction. So I'll just let that sink in for a moment. Jamie, does that feel about right?
Oh, yeah. And there's definitely days where it feels like you can spend less than that very
Mhm.
easily and be
Yeah.
very, very busy.
Yeah. And so, how you make that 5 to 13% of the time something that is actually rewarding and in line with the idea of being a principal teacher is one of the things we'll talk about today. Will you read this quote out loud for us, Jamie?
The principal's typical workday consists of a continuous stream of brief, fragmented, problem-oriented interactions, most of which are initiated by others. Principals who begin the morning with an intention to visit classrooms often find themselves waylaid by students, teachers, staff, and parents with urgent problems to be solved.
So, will you use the chat again? What in this sounds right to you? Are there keywords and phrases where you're like, yeah, that actually sounds like today, even? Jamie, what stands out in it today for you?
The fragmented part
Mm,
feels very much, I sometimes look at Margaret's uh, s- job and just space and be able to, with envy, because she can focus on something where I get it and like boom, boom, boom. So I think that feels very real
yeah.
and solving other people's problems.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking at the chat. So for Sarah, it's the continuous stream that's coming at you, and it does not stop when the kids go home. The problem oriented interactions that you start with a particular intention and then the day may go the other way. I see waylaid, responsive. Yep. And for Heather, it's that initiated by others, that it is hard to make the day go in the way that you had planned. And absolutely, Carrie, it feels like things are popping up and they're urgent. Okay,
So
Jamie.
all of the so much of our job is focused on being a building manager. And that's a lot of what we described. And with that, you end up delegating that instructional leadership to maybe a coach, if you have one, or partnering with educational consultants, or having some PD providers who come in and provide support. And then in some cases, it just your teachers are left to look at webinars, listen to podcasts to get their own growth. And for your teachers, that may be where they're getting their most learning. And all of that focus that we have as principals on being the building manager keep us out of the loop instructionally, all those things on the right.
So when you delegate the instructional focus to all of these other people, it ends up making it so that you don't know what is actually happening for teachers in their professional learning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we've come to think about this sort of basic path of instructional leadership. And I think this happens in schools and in districts all over. And this may resonate with your experience. And it often starts with a curriculum. You, as a school leader or your district, purchases a curriculum, and there is some professional development that usually comes with it, probably 2 days of PD at the beginning of the year that is from the publisher of the curriculum. And then if you're lucky, there's some ongoing supports. And so that may be some people doing some classroom visits with you at some point through the year, but it's a very linear process, and very simplified process.
And it's a process we've found doesn't actually really work. So we're going to walk you through this process and what the principal's role is in that process and how things sometimes fall down when that's the plan for implementation.
So if we start at the beginning with the curriculum, as a principal, my job might be to buy the curriculum, sign the purchase order, input all of that, and then the boxes come. And often in the summertime, my job might be to unpack those boxes and organize them, put them in the book room, get them to classrooms. And that may be the extent. This may or may not be our book room with a certain curriculum still there, unpacked. But then when you get to professional development, it's often considered like a big win if as a principal, you are in the room for that PD. And so you get points as a principal if your PD provider is there doing their thing and you are in the back of the room, even if you are checking email, doing all the other parts of the job, that is like gold star for you.
I often hear from friends who are like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe your principal attends PD." Like that can be mind blowing sometimes because in a lot of instances, the PD is not relevant to the principal, and so it can feel like a better use of time to have a meeting during that time, or like Jamie was saying, multitask during the professional development.
And then again, going back to if you're lucky enough to have supports, not all of us do, but if you're lucky enough to have supports, it might mean somebody from the district office, it might mean some external provider coming and providing some support and doing like a walkthrough, looking at going into classrooms with you, which is not inherently a bad thing. I don't want to
It's
dismiss
the
that.
best part of these visits.
Yeah. And as sometimes that's really important for me to make sure I get into classrooms because it can be easy not to. Um, and that process doesn't always focus on did kids learn what they were taught? And so
Yeah. So, like this particular observation walkthrough form is one of your faves, Jimmy. What do you not love about it?
it is not focused at like there's no aspect of student learning in this process. And it is so we're not looking at data on how students did on a lesson or even on a bigger scale. It's really it's hard to give actionable feedback, to be honest.
So one of the things that we've talked about is like it's going into classrooms to see if the learning objective is written up on the board, if the lesson is standards aligned, if the teacher is using the particular curriculum that they're supposed to be using. It actually becomes more like a compliance check than actually an opportunity to focus on the teaching. And I was telling Jamie, like, you got to know about Oregon RTII because this is actually where they do walkthroughs that are focused on things like opportunities to respond. And like, that's just not normal. It's so special. And I hope that you're able to see the difference between like the walkthroughs where you're going in and you're actually focusing on student learning during the lesson, especially if you've got data accompanying it, versus the kind of more hollow walkthroughs, which is checking to make sure that the teacher is in compliance with a district initiative. Jamie, anything else you wanted to add with that?
I would like I've been in situations like this, these walkthroughs where at the end of the day we get presented sort of like a score, like here's where you are. And again, without any sort of this is where the students are at. And so there's not an opportunity for student learning and teacher practice to come together.
Mm-hmm.
So we just quickly gave you an overview of like what we call the basic path. And for us, it overemphasizes curriculum and de-emphasizes, or in some cases, kind of ignores teaching practices. And then it leaves you providing stock training and supports. Like nowhere in the professional development or the supports are things really tailored to what your school needs. And as a leader, like in those professional developments, when you buy a curriculum, there really isn't much opportunity to say, here's what our teachers really need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It also, in our experience, you can see our state test scores over there, has led to very flat results. And so when we think about this basic path as a principal, I find that it really displaces us or me as the principal, as the leader of instruction. I am removed from that. I become more the passive middle manager. Is the PO in? Are the books in classrooms? We put the onus on external providers to provide that support. And for many times those are temporary, whether it's grant funded or whatever, it's not going to be there when we, are still going to be there in a couple of years. And as the principal, you do all of these things, you remain very disconnected from the classroom experience. So that is a quick little our basic path, curriculum, professional development, supports, very linear process. Focus on, are we doing the curriculum? And what we have found is after a couple of years, you end up right back where you started, adopting a new curriculum and starting the process all over again.
Yeah. And so I remember at one point in the earlier years when I was coaching, someone was telling me about how like your job is to coach yourself out of a job. And I was like, huh, okay, I'm going to try to imagine that. And I remember when I came to Nystrom, I told Jamie, like, I'm going to teach everybody how to do the thing that we're setting out to do, and then we'll get it done in like the first couple of years, and then I'll move on. And he was like, uh-huh, yeah. And I think part of that is that in the past few years, what I've been learning is that when you set curriculum fidelity as a goal, you actually set the bar too low for really interesting work that teachers want to get into, where you learn that there's holes in the curriculum and you're realizing that there's things you want to do to augment it, and you're wanting to tailor things to the students who are in your classroom and stuff. And that's actually where you need the most help to be able to make it really work for you. And then Jamie and I were just looking at our middle of the year data, and we're realizing we're in year 5 of a curriculum and we have strayed a bit, and we need to come back to the idea of the intention of the routines. It's not a thing now that I think of as like, okay, I'm going to be able to coach myself out of a job once teachers know how to implement the curriculum at basic
Yeah,
level.
Margaret had no plans to be here this long, but I think the idea that the work keeps evolving is a theme hopefully you'll see as we move forward in sort of a different approach, is that it's beyond just, okay, we're going to teach this curriculum. And then once the teacher's got it, she is free to leave and the work will carry on and things are great.
Well, I think part of that is because I hadn't actually had the experience of working in tandem with a principal. Okay, so Jamie, principal in this basic role.
All right. So I said some of this before, but as a principal in this basic system, I am really the middle manager, the thing I did not want to be when I left the classroom. And there's that tug and between the district office and school sites and your teachers. And as principal, you are stuck squarely in the middle of that, especially if it's a district initiative. You are then also becoming a passive participant. You are not in sort of the weeds with your teachers in the same way and can't be as much of a support as you could or should be for them.
Well, and you're not initiating things.
Yeah, yeah. And then you be with all of that, you become an observer. Like, oh, I see things aren't going well, and it's almost becomes a little bit paralyzing because I don't know what to do when they aren't going well. And so I'm stuck.
Or you imagine things are really going well, but you're in your office so much that you don't actually know. Yeah. So, in this sort of basic path, the role of the coach is actually to just coach and to coach by him or herself. And I've done this kind of coaching before. It's where you're coaching without plans for sustainability. You're just doing your thing in isolation or maybe in tandem with the instructional leadership team. But it's a siloed approach to the role. And that silo actually makes the teacher siloed as well. So they have minimal voice in what's happening in the school, what leadership decisions are getting made. They have limited participation. They might show up and be on a committee, but does the committee accomplish anything? And so as a result, teachers just focus in on their own classroom. Like, I'm going to do right by my kids for the 180 days that I've got them with my door closed. All right.
All right. So we've talked about what does not work. We're going to try and walk you through a framework or a way of thinking that we think works better and at least has for us.
Yeah. So the role of instructional leadership, it's the role we found to be a little less traveled, but it changes the principal's job from being the person who signs the PO for the curriculum and delivers it or not to the teacher's classroom. Rather than curriculum being the starting place, teaching strategies, explicit instruction, instructional routines, that becomes the starting place. So, Jamie, when we started to do this work focusing on the teaching that we wanted to have happen, what happened for you? How did your job change?
I needed a lot of coaching. I needed to learn how to deliver the instruction. And so it started with the PDs. Instead of sitting in the back, I needed to be right there, like practicing with the teachers in the PD. And then because I am me, I needed lots of extra coaching because this was not easy for me. But I needed that in order to be able to provide teachers with feedback. If I couldn't teach it, there was no way I could go in and give them feedback that was actually going to land in the right spot. And then we needed good student data. I love data. We look at data a lot, and when you don't have the right data, it becomes really challenging.
All right, so we're going to talk about what that looks like.
All right, so this was on the left. That's me way back when, probably 5 years ago. I used to teach fourth grade, and so learning foundational skills was really tricky for me. Um, I learned I learned a long and a short vowel, the difference, sometime in my 40s. Won't admit what age. Um, but I needed to be able to do that and like practice with Margaret and then go into classrooms and just ask the teachers, can I teach your lesson? Great. And sometimes get coached by Margaret mid-lesson. But I needed to do that in order to be able to monitor instruction that was happening.
I think it also created a huge amount of buy-in where teachers were like, oh, I might have been wanting to like just sit this one out or just dabble in this curriculum a little bit, but instead to be able to see how seriously our principal was taking it and then how open to coaching and to feedback you were. It actually modeled the way for teachers to be open to coaching and open to feedback. I really loved when you were talking about the things that were hard. We were like, I'm having a hard time getting my lesson down to 30 minutes. Like, here are the things that I'm working on. That kind of transparent learning made it easier for teachers to talk about some of the challenges that they were facing. It also made it so that we started to realize like all the time that we have, which is actually very little, we do not have a lot of time with where our teachers are able to gather together. We spend pretty much all of the time that we are gathered together focused on the actual teaching. So practicing instruction, talking about instruction, problem solving instruction. It makes it so that like nuts and bolts end up in a newsletter or an email so that the time that we're together can be spent talking about teaching.
And I think that's a big shift for a lot of leaders is to be able to carve out create the systems that those conversations can happen by email or a newsletter or whatever, and your time together in person can be focused on teaching and learning.
Yeah. Okay. So another shift for
Yeah.
us was the data.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that objective data and having the right data. And so like what you see the box around on the bottom there, that tells us for each one of our groups how many kids are passing the lessons or the group of lessons. And so they do quick little progress monitoring checks, and you can see, when we have the goal is 80% of our kids passing. So when the percent passing is in green, things are good. And that allows myself or Margaret to see like where do we need to spend more time, and what do we need to focus on with teachers. And that's really what this allows us to do, in addition to seeing like the student level data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So we shifted from thinking about just curriculum to thinking about effective practice, the implementation of evidence-based practices. We might find those things in curriculum, in published programs or in lesson plans, or we may need to add them into the curriculum that we've got. What's most important is that we have really clear expectations for what the instruction should look like in action, and that we have objective data that we're able to monitor to let us know if these practices are really getting the impact that we want via student learning. Okay, thinking about the role of the principal in effective implementation. Jamie was talking about how like he gets a gold star in a lot of people's book if he just shows up to a professional development session. And rather than thinking about things that way, rather than thinking about individual PD sessions that might happen in a room down the hall or a cafeteria at a different school or a hotel meeting room, we're really trying to think about things as ongoing professional learning where we are all figuring out what's working and then figuring out together how do we get around the things that are not actually working. The focus becomes on learning how to implement. So Jamie, what was that like for you?
I think it was making sure that our professional learning was actually translating to classrooms. And so that requires paying attention in that PD, knowing what's being taught and talked about, and then being able to go look for those things in classrooms. And knowing that things are going to change over time. Year one of implementation is not going to look the same as year two, and year two is not going to look the same as year three.
So just a little not literacy related anecdote. In the beginning of the school year, Jamie sent me a text because he went to the training for the new math curriculum that our district was adopting. And he's like, I'm the only principal who's here. And when we think about what ends up happening, the burden falls on the teacher if there's no support. The teacher has to figure out how to make that transfer from the isolated PD over to their classroom. And a lot of times things get lost in translation or there are competing priorities and the transfer just doesn't happen. And so we've really focused in on learning to implement. You want to describe our pictures, Jamie?
Yeah, so these pictures are taken last year as we were learning new writing approach. And it started with our instructional leadership team getting trained, and then those teachers bringing it to the broader staff and modeling the instruction. And I would say doing that, our teachers have never been so excited to see, like for the PDs. They were so excited to see someone other than me or Margaret model instruction. And there was a lot of momentum and excitement in our building doing that.
And it made it so that the PDs could be like, okay, we're going to show you how to do this thing that we learned. Then everybody's going to go off and try it. And then we'll get the opportunity to come back together to talk about how it went. Made it really fun for me and Jamie to have this focus of going to look to see what the instruction looks like in classrooms, taking pictures or videos so that we could all kind of rally around trying to make this take root.
I mentioned earlier that the work adapts over time. And so what you see on the left is a really, really red graph from many years ago. And that just represents like the percent of our students who needed intensive intervention. You're looking at dibbles. And so at that point, so much of our instruction was on foundational skills, direct instruction. Like you can see an example of it there.
The
Small group.
teaching of below grade level phonics was the focus for a while.
Yeah. And moving forward a couple of years, we still have a lot of red, but we have a lot of blue, green, and yellow. And so our instruction looks different and it has evolved. And I think this is one of the things that keeps me here and hopefully keeps Margaret here too, is the work is not the same as it was 5 years ago, right? If it's just doing the same thing and trying to master that as we did 5 years ago, you get a little tired of it. But now there's new challenges and we're using the data to really tell us what we need to work on and figuring those things out as a staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so thinking about effective implementation, the goal is this alignment across classrooms and grade levels in order to create this coherent learning experience that kids will have traveling from one grade to the next grade to the next grade. And I think one of the things that we've had to think a lot about is that the implementation changes over time in response to changes in our staff, changes in our staff's capacity, and then also changing in response to improved student data. All right, so let's think through the role of the principal in supporting the work. So Jamie was talking about like what it's like to do walkthroughs with external consultants who are mostly looking for like curriculum compliance or alignment with grade level standards. And when you're dealing with it just from like this external voice coming in to look to see like, are you doing the thing? That's very different than the way that we've come to think of the principal's work as being really needing to focus on adaptive leadership. So Jamie's going to talk a little bit about adapting to changing conditions.
Things are always changing. And I think there's always a reason to lose sight of the goal or lose momentum for any number of reasons, right? That your district can adopt a new curriculum. There may be a new assessment. There may be a loss of funding, and so positions go away. There might be changes in staffing. We've had them mid-year where people are reassigned to different spots, and like you have to manage all of that. Changes in leadership. We know that principals don't stick around all too that long in buildings, and in the district leadership, they don't stick around that long.
Superintendents stick around often for an even shorter period of time. So, like, these new initiatives are coming at you as a result of these changes in leadership.
Yeah. And with all of that change, there's always the next new initiative. So all of these are very valid reasons, and they can be very distracting and very hard to like stay the course. And as a principal or as a leader, part of our job is to kind of block out that noise and make sure that that happens. Um,
So then you start thinking about your job differently. You're like thinking about how to shape the context in response to changing conditions.
Yeah. So part of it is creating a vision. And so for us in our school, it's really focused on what can we do here at our school. And then a huge part of my job is insulating our staff from what happens outside of this building, whether it's at the district level or wherever else. Like, how do we maintain over the course of that school year? This is what we said we started with, and we said we're going to focus on, and we're going to stay the course and look at the data and make adjustments based on that, not all the other things happening. And then with that, I think it goes hand in hand, but supporting teacher leaders and building them up to really own the work, and that whole idea of distributive leadership.
So we're going to show you what these 4 bullet points look like for us at Nystrom.
Yeah. So we have a vision for literacy. We developed this before Margaret came, and I think there's a lot there. You can look at it later if you want to, if you can't sleep tonight. But these are the two.
It'll put you to sleep. Is that what you're saying?
These are the two sentences that like we come back to, and we use this as a staff a lot. Margaret, do you just want to read these aloud?
We know that reading is not a natural process, and given all this, it is our job to explicitly and systematically teach students how to read. We believe that literacy, the ability to read, write, and understand, is a civil right. And what's funny is I was just talking with a first grade teacher this morning about our vision statement. She brought it up saying that when we were in our school-wide data dive and she was needing to think through the data and come up with her action plan for how to get even more students reading well, she said that the vision statement was something that gave her the fuel that she needed in order to be able to tap into a reserve of energy in order to be able to keep working. So sometimes the job can just feel so grueling and so tiring that you need to be able to come back to your larger moral imperative, your larger purpose for your work in order to be able to find the energy to stay focused and keep going.
And I think a lot of times like vision statements can be like we all have them, but to actually have it work as an anchor requires keep coming back to it, talking about it with people. So it's not just something you throw out in June and then is left to just sit there. I mentioned teacher leadership a couple of minutes ago and like building up your teacher leadership team. So we have an instructional leadership team, call them our ILT, and they have been really instrumental in this like process. Going back years ago, they sat with us and we co-created a data analysis protocol. So that meant, we're collecting all this progress monitoring data. What do we do with it? We needed the teachers to be able to really own that process and own what their collaboration time looked like. And when teachers gave input, that protocol really kind of took hold. The other thing I would say about that is we have refined it and adjusted it each year, just as like the challenge is different than it was 5 years ago. Therefore, how we respond to the data looks a little bit different as well. We ask them lots of questions about whatever we're focusing on, like how is it going in the classroom? How is the classroom experience for you? How is the planning experience for you? Trying to get their feedback as well, because we have one sort of lens that we see things through, and they have a very different one. And so wanting to make sure they feel heard and seen in that as well. Collaboration time, I mentioned, they use the protocol in that collaboration time and recognizing that Margaret and I, there's only two of us. We can't be in, 7 different grade level collaboration meetings every Wednesday. And so we need teachers to really own that. And it's a very different skill to be able to lead a group of adults compared to teaching kids all day. And that's what we are trained in doing is like teaching kids. And so supporting them around that collaboration. Let's help you build an agenda. Let's talk through the data beforehand. Let's talk through the areas that might feel uncomfortable or a little sticky, is really important for our teacher leaders. And then planning and leading PD. So giving them the opportunity to stand up there in front of their colleagues as well is great. Um, the fun part of the work is like celebrating the success along the way. So it's really important when you get that data to find the bright spots and not just find the bright spots, but be able to connect those to teacher actions and instructional decisions that people are making and connect those in a very explicit way. So people see, hey, we talked about this, we practiced this, and look what it did for this group of kids. And then this last one, Margaret said our data dive that we had on Monday, we had to kind of come back to this as well as letting the data dictate next steps and being very clear, like, hey, we can't, in some cases that may not be in line with what adults want, but it's really what our kids need.
Yeah, so when we think about this enabling context, these feedback cycles that Jamie was talking about are really necessary. So we can't just like say something in a data dive, tell teachers this is the thing you need to go off and do, and then just let them grapple with it on their own and never have the opportunity to be able to find out what challenges are being encountered and help people through it. So one of the things that we've shifted towards is trying to collect as much information about how things are going in transparent feedback cycles where our instructional leadership team checks in with their grade level and brings the feedback right back to the team meeting. We've started to think about our instructional leadership team as, yes, they are instructional leaders. They're also an implementation team. So we talk specifically about concepts related to implementation science, which we'll get into just a little bit later today. But the idea of working around barriers and working together to be able to innovate.
So we talked about getting feedback from teachers and like having them talk to each other as well as share with us what's going well as like the poster on the right, like what do you need to remember like a year from now when you teach this again or in 6 or 7 months? But trying to make sure that teachers' voice is really lifted up in that process as well.
All right, so the basic path was one that we found out didn't work particularly well. This meant Jamie needed to kind of revamp his job description. So when we're thinking about a more active implementation, will you encapsulate what you've taken on as your job?
I had to be actively participating in learning throughout like adult learning, and being willing to adjust based on that data, the feedback, and what the needs are. And so in some cases, this is a little less linear than that basic path. And then being the one who is leading instruction and collaboration, not putting that in somebody else's hands and really owning that.
And so this means that rather than working in a silo by myself, I end up needing to be in tandem with Jamie and our instructional leadership team, listening, observing, collaborating. Means that I have to continually adjust based on the data. This could be student data. It is also our observational data and what teachers are experiencing and the needs that are arising in our students and our teachers. It means that our job is distributed leadership. Like all of us, our coach, our instructional leadership team, our principal, and our teachers are all sharing responsibility and expertise. So we all take opportunities to step up or to ask for help. And this has really changed the role of teachers at our school. So instead of teachers just teaching in their classroom focused on their own kiddos, they end up being more aware of the school-wide perspective because they're frequently asked to provide feedback. And it allows teachers to focus on trying to understand new concepts, new learning, implementing it, getting feedback, and then improving so that we're constantly in this iterative process of trying to get better than we ever have been.
I think the other piece with that, the benefit of is teachers feel really valued and seen and like excited about it. And so like this work is really hard. Like teacher's job is not easy, but when you feel like you're not just kind of working in isolation, um, we've seen that teacher retention piece as a benefit. Like our teachers are sticking around despite all of the challenges, and I think part of that is because they feel supported and also feel heard.
Mhm. Okay, so this basic path.
Not great results.
Yeah, okay. So we actually discovered a framework that better represents what we've been doing. And apparently, it's a framework others who got an opportunity to get some support from Oregon already knew about. It is effective practices, effective implementation, and this enabling context together as a formula, sort of like the simple view of reading, a multiplication formula, to be able to focus on significant outcomes. So you may or may not already have the label for it, but what we discovered in hindsight was actually everything that we've been doing has been aligned with this active implementation framework. So just to recap, in case you're not familiar with it, effective practices are evidence-based practices. They're teachable, they're learnable, they're doable, and they're accessible. And this is very different than putting curriculum first, because honestly, a lot of curriculum that's out on the market, it's not actually teachable as written. It's just got so much in there that it couldn't actually be implemented as it's written. So this is a different way of thinking about it, taking reasonable sized chunks that can actually be implemented, putting them into place, and then seeing the results from them. Effective implementation, this is when teachers and staff are able to successfully implement and then change the implementation over time in stages as we're getting to be more skilled and as student data is changing. The enabling context, this is where leadership really has to make some smart choices when it comes to resources and supports to make sure that everything is aligned so that expectations are being matched with supports so that implementation can actually happen. And then the question always is like, is what we're doing getting us the outcomes that we're hoping for?
I think one thing just to back up with that, when you talk about effective practices, I think for a lot of principals, if you ask like what are the practices you're doing in literacy or something, they'll say, oh, we're using X curriculum. And if you shift away from thinking about that, but what are the practices, it forces like it changes the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. So this active implementation framework was brought to us via a research partner. Jamie, will you talk a little bit about the implementation side of things?
Yeah, so implementation science is really just the study of methods to promote the adoption and integration of evidence-based practices and interventions. And it sounds really easy, right? That cute little cartoon is that researcher knows exactly what to do. You just need to do A to get to B. It sounds really easy. Teachers can sit there and then you step out into the real world or the classroom and it is a lot more challenging.
I think this cartoon also really works for leadership. A lot of times it'll be like leaders are thinking it's going to be easy. A is going to happen, and then it's just going to transition into teachers doing this in their classrooms without really realizing all of the barriers that may be up, making it difficult for that translation to take place.
I have totally done this where if I get the teachers the curriculum, I get them the tools, we should have great results. And then school happens.
All right, so we were really excited to find out that there are actually researchers who study the implementation process, what facilitates it, and also what common barriers are. All right, so coming back to the active implementation framework, it's a multiplication problem. So we get a chance to do some math. If you have an ineffective practice and you do it really well, and you do it in the most supportive environment, it's not actually going to result in significant outcomes for kids. So we want to swap out those ineffective practices, put in an effective evidence-based practice, and then see what multiplication is possible to be able to get all of the yield that is possible. A lot of times things don't go as smoothly as you want them to go. So sometimes you have this perfect evidence-based practice that is going to be just right, but then something gets in the way of effective implementation. Maybe the person who's giving the intervention doesn't quite understand the purpose or how to do it. Sometimes it's dosage. It's like you have a really great intervention, but then there's only 20 minutes 3 times a week to implement it. And that's just not going to result in the planned dosage. No matter how much you get excited about that intervention, you're not going to yield the results that you would if you were able to do it fully and effectively. And then we get to go into a little bit of fourth grade math beyond here if we're thinking about further decimals. You have this really effective practice, but you only do some of it or do it sometimes, and you do it in an environment that's not really conducive for learning. So I have seen, for example, interventions delivered a few times a week, not every day, and in a school cafeteria. And I'll let you do the math in your head for a moment. You end up yielding not the kind of significant outcomes that you were hoping for, and it can be really demoralizing. So Jamie and I, every time we're in presentations, listening to other leaders who are talking about what they're doing, we always want to know, like, but is it working? Like, are you getting significant outcomes? And so we try to be really transparent about our data. Jamie, will you walk through this one that you created for us?
Yeah, so this is looking at our now, well, they're now fifth graders, but from first to fourth grade. And so when they came back to in-person learning in 2021, 91% of our then first graders were in the red or needed intensive support and dibbles. And you can see the progress they had over first grade, some pretty big gains down to
I think,
50%.
yeah. Yeah, and I think this really, you don't often see big gains in the first year. I think the reason for our gains this year, well, one was because of a huge hit with the pandemic. I think the second part, though, was I've never been in a place where teachers were more willing to try to figure out how to do something with fidelity right away. Like, okay, we're really going to try this thing and try it wholeheartedly and see what the results will be.
So if we follow that same group of kids, the next year they went into second grade, and you can see kind of that summer slide and then proficiency increase and the percent in the red decrease. So really from the beginning of first grade to the end of second grade, those 2 years, we saw huge decrease in the percent of students who needed intensive intervention. And at this point, we're looking at about 50% of kids in the green and blue. And
Mm-hmm.
then they go on to third grade. And this is when Margaret started yelling at me that I needed to stop just focusing on the red. And she wasn't wrong, because we started having more kids in the green and blue than we had in the red. And you can see the trend as they went into fifth grade, and really chipping away at that percent in the red to really just a handful of kids.
I think a lot of times it's sort of a personality test. Like, what do you see in the data? Does your eye go straight to the red? Does your eye go to the improvement? Does your eye go to the students who are the line of proficiency? And I think one of the things that we've had to do as we're getting more data literate is be able to look at it all simultaneously. One of the questions that often comes up is like, so if you focus on early literacy and you focus on dibbles, like, does that actually pay off on things like state testing or on like larger comprehension measures? Jimmy, can you check to this one a little bit?
Yeah, so this is again a cohort of students. This is looking at different cohort of students. Our students start taking the test in third grade, and this is looking at kids in third, fourth, the same kids in third, fourth, and fifth grade.
No, this is fourth, fifth, and sixth.
Sorry, fourth, fifth, and sixth. Sorry. And you can see kind of the steady rise. It's obviously not as quick or necessarily, don't want to say easy, but as quick as getting proficiency in dibbles. But you can see some gains over time.
All right, so thinking about implementation, the things that we've learned the hard way together. I think one thing we keep coming back to is implementation takes a continued focus. It is so easy to end up getting distracted by the new things that come up, and we have to keep coming back to what's our purpose and giving it the amount of time and support that's needed.
And I would just add on, like, even like for us, like we're 5 years into this, like we can't assume that it will just continue doing its thing just because we want it to or we've had success in the past. Like you can't take this part for granted.
Mm-hmm.
The
All right,
second
Jada's
piece,
your favorite.
Yeah, second piece is like having that objective data and really using that as the backbone for your decision making. So having that be at the core and making sure teachers can also look at the data and make smart instructional decisions with that.
Teaching really has to be the focus of all of our time together, our instructional leadership team, staff meetings, the collaborative time that teachers have to plan with one another, leadership meetings, they're all focused on the actual teaching.
And then alignment across grade levels is super important, right? We have everyone in our building is using Dibbles. We have that data. It makes for a much easier way for us to gather that data and tell a story of a student's learning trajectory over time. But then also like the classroom experiences for teachers when they are learning instructional routines in first grade and then go on to second grade and are they're using the same ones and then third grade, it makes the student's job easier to learn and it also makes teachers' job a lot easier.
And more fun to be able to say, like, I'm doing this thing in my classroom and my colleagues are doing it too. And we're able to talk about how things are going. It feels like a much more collaborative, energizing experience. So for me, just to kind of think about zooming back, I've learned a lot about how fidelity to an effective practice, it's a goal, it's important, but it's not the goal. The goal actually has to be sustained implementation over time. That sustaining, it takes a whole lot of work. And the work is actually never done. This concept that I had of being able to coach myself out of a job, that would just be leaving things as they currently are in order to erode or decay over time, instead of thinking about the process as constantly trying to get better, adapting to the new conditions that we're creating by getting things right for kids. My job really is to seek feedback and to adjust. So seeking it from Jamie as my principal, or from our interventionist, or from our teachers on staff, also from kids, to be able to try to adjust according to people's needs. And I always come back to this idea that, like, things, if they're feeling like they're going smoothly or easily, it means that you're not in classrooms often enough. Because every time you walk into a classroom, you'll be able to see some really wonderful things that are taking place, and then also some things that could be improved. And I think it's really important for us to realize that there is, I think, a thing that can happen for example, district leaders or external consultants, where they're like, oh, they're doing the thing, like the work is done, it must be going smoothly. And the people who are really in the ground floor of the building, walking into classrooms a lot, will be able to give feedback on the things that are or are not working and what it's going to take to try to make it last.
All right. So as I look back, I love this quote from Becky Sullivan, who's led a lot of the literacy work in California. And she said, every initiative lives or dies on a principal's desk. And if you think about the any number of district level initiatives or state level initiatives that have come down over the last 11 years, how that looks at a school really depends on what I do as a principal with it. If I really get excited about it and own it and sell it to teachers, like it can take hold. And um, if I don't, or just kind of do it for compliance sake, we probably know what's going to happen there. So I think that really thinking about it that way really lifts up the principal's role and moves it away from being a middle manager. And then when it comes to the learning part, like we have to be involved in every step of implementation. Like when Margaret was going through that multiplication problem, if I wasn't involved with that, I think it would be really hard to have this school-wide work, as amazing as she is, without the us two being aligned, it's really challenging. And then kind of hand in hand with that, the idea of giving your instructional leadership to a coach or to a consultant or to anyone else really devalues your role in the process and it makes it hard for things to stick after they may go away or funding may go away. And then back to where we started, this idea of striving to be the principal teacher and being open to learning. And oftentimes that means sitting alongside your teachers and being the one who knows the least about what you're learning, but being willing to learn. It is the fun part of the job.
All right, we've got time for questions if you want to put them in the chat or come off mute.
I have
Is
a
that up?
question.
Great, Carrie.
Thanks. I would love to hear your best advice for how to move a team of teachers uh, toward making decisions based on what's best for the students versus what is best for the teacher or most comfortable for the teacher.
That's good.
Yeah. So giving you our best advice on Wednesday at 5 p.m. Has to be the caveat. I feel like, so I was just in a data meeting. Actually, I was in a planning meeting of grades 3 and 4. They're meeting together. They're talking about the way they want our book clubs to be during our walk to read time. And they were talking about it. And the conversation was going towards teacher preference. Like, this is what I like to do. This is the way that I've been doing it. And teachers were sharing practice. And then one of the teachers pulled up MClass and pulled up the maze data for all the kids that were in grades 3 and 4. And she's like, well, according to this is what I'm seeing. And bringing that data to the center of the conversation made everything shift. It was like, oh, well, actually, and then we started having a different conversation than we would have had. So I think one of the things that has been helpful is Jamie and I always explain the decisions that we're making grounded in the data. And it becomes the habit of our teachers also when we're having a moment of needing to make a decision to be like, does the data confirm or disprove this thing that we're wanting to take on? That answer your question, Carrie, or do you have a follow-up?
Thank you. That was great.
I think there's another piece of it around this idea of like, and then maybe it goes back to the vision piece in terms of like you have to create the culture, the adult culture in your building to where um that it isn't teachers aren't working in silos. And so when they're willing to learn from each other, when they're willing to see each other's data and also like challenge each other, and that doesn't happen overnight. And so I think that's sort of the other piece of it as well.
Okay. If you want to, you're welcome to chime in. I see that Beth has a question about our work in literacy and whether it's had an impact on math outcomes. Interestingly, we did have a little bit of a bump that we couldn't really explain. We're like, our focus has been on literacy. Like, how do we explain this little bump in math? And then it turned out there had also been a study that was done of California's early literacy support block grant. So we're one of 75 schools in California that had been part of that grant. And when a researcher did an analysis of the data of the schools that participated in that grant, there were spillover effects onto math. And when I asked her why she thinks that might be, because like you might have a theory about, well, the kids can read the word problems now, or something else like that. Her theory was that the focus was on teaching and on planning. And I thought that was interesting.
I think the other piece, and we are definitely not there yet with this, but is if you go back to the active implementation model, and when you start with effective practices, the like, and like using explicit instruction as an example of one, like that can be applied to math or literacy. And so when you use that as your anchor, there can be more crossover than just we're doing this curriculum in which the practices might be wildly different.
The balanced literacy of math does exist in many common published programs. Any other questions?
Webinar.
I don't really have a question, but I just want to say this has been such a valuable hour worth of my time as a principal. I needed this inspiration right now at this moment. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your journey and your story, and just know that you've had an impact on me today.
That is so kind of you to say, because I think Jamie and I both were like, we're dragging, we're tired. It's been a long week and it's only Wednesday, but we'll show up. So I'm glad to see that rallying made a difference for you. Thank you.
I think that's why we wanted to share this. And I think the timing of it is so perfect as people are looking at their winter data and really thinking about are we going to change what we're doing within our program or are we going to think about the instruction, right? And I love how you said it's you got to just focus on the instruction because we say all the time there are no perfect programs, right? And so it's looking at the data and saying, what do our students need? And so the timing of this was really good. In the chat, I just put a video that we often share that has the implementation formula. I think your example is a very good real life and less cartoony and animated than this video, but it because your data is the positive example of when they start multiplying fraction bars in this video. So don't watch this now, folks. Just open it and put it in your one of your tabs to watch it another time. But it's really powerful to share the impact of any one of those factors. If it's less than one,
And
really
I'm
has huge impact.
pretty sure that's the same video as we were talking about this with our leadership team that we shared with them, and it's really, really good and quick.
It's a
Um,
classic. My
yeah,
favorite
and I
video.
think one of the things that was helpful was being able to be transparent about like this is what we're trying to set up when it comes to feedback cycles. This is the reason why, because there's no way any one person can anticipate all of the things that can go wrong. Like your job is to help us like by speaking out to say what things need to get adjusted. It's nice to have that sort of third point where you watch a video and then you talk about it to set up a new system.
I think I have a question actually now that we're talking. When you talk about your leadership team, your implementation leadership team, how many teachers are on there, and do you intentionally try and have like a breadth of like a K1, 2? Like, is it does it go through TK through 6 so you have representation on that leadership team? So, like, can you talk to me a little bit about the structure of like the time you meet, when you meet, and then that kind of
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah, we have a teacher represented at every grade level. And there's been years in which we've had more than one teacher at a grade level for various reasons. Um, for example, this year we had a teacher, our third grade teacher who's been here and been on our ILT for years was pregnant. And so we had somebody kind of in the wings on ILT all year long, knowing that when she went out on maternity leave, like things could keep moving. Um, we meet, um, we try and meet every other week. It doesn't always happen based on the school calendar, but we try and meet it, 1 to 2 times a month. And those are 90-minute meetings. They are way like our contract is very lean in terms of teacher hours and things like that. And so we time card, we pay our teachers that for their time there. And it's well worth our site dollars to be spent on that.
And we've tried a whole lot of things that didn't work. Like we tried this year, we're like, we need to take on this new math curriculum the district has adopted. So we're going to alternate ILT meetings. One's going to be math and one's going to be English language arts. It's going to be nice and clean. And it doesn't work like that. So I think thinking about it as an implementation team where we're asking them to be able to help us think through a problem of practice and then check in our next meeting about how that's going and making space for them to have the opportunity to add things that need to get put onto the agenda. The only thing that Jamie didn't say that I think is key is that we have really good snacks. So we have teachers in good moods while we're having these meetings, and it's key.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, I can only speak to sort of our contract, but the adjunct duties, like in some places, something like a leadership team would be an adjunct duty. And what we want from our teachers is above and beyond that. And so like we want to make sure that they get time carded for that. Like they deserve it.